The stars stretched endlessly in every direction, a quiet ocean of light and shadow. Captain Han Gyujin stood on the bridge of the Terran vessel Resolute Dawn, his eyes fixed on the shimmering arc of the Proxima Expanse. His crew worked silently around him, each person moving with the calm focus of people who had done this 100 times before. They were on a routine escort mission, guiding 2 civilian ships through a sector known for sudden dangers. It was supposed to be uneventful. It was not. The warning came suddenly, a sharp alarm that cut through the calm hum of the ship. Gyujin's head turned sharply to the sensor officer, a young man named Park Jin-soo. "Multiple contacts," Jin-soo said, his voice tight. "No identification codes. Closing fast." The captain's jaw tightened. "Raise shields. Tell the civilians to take evasive maneuvers and stay behind us." A moment later, the black of space bloomed with streaks of silver and crimson, ships with long, sharp hulls, their designs alien and aggressive. The Arvari Dominion. Gyujin recognized the markings instantly. He had read reports about them. Isolationist, proud, and always ready to prove their superiority in battle. The first salvo of energy beams struck the Resolute Dawn, the impact shuddering through the ship. Gyujin gave orders with sharp precision. "Evasive pattern Delta 4. Return fire. Keep them away from the civilians." The crew moved quickly, but the Arvari ships were faster. One darted across their flank, firing a disruptor blast that knocked out a key engine. Lights flickered on the bridge. Gyujin knew they were already at a disadvantage. Then the boarding alarms sounded. Heavy metallic thuds echoed through the corridors as magnetic clamps latched onto the hull. The ship shook again as docking tubes extended. The Arvari were coming aboard. "Security teams, hold the main corridors," Gyujin ordered. He pulled a sidearm from his belt. "I'll lead the defense at Junction 3. Keep the civilians safe at all costs." The corridors filled with the hiss of airlocks opening. The Arvari soldiers stepped through, tall, armored figures with curved, blade-like weapons and rifles that glowed with pale blue light. Their armor shimmered faintly, making them look almost ghostly under the emergency lights. Gyujin fired, his shots striking true, but the Arvari were relentless. He fought alongside his crew, every move deliberate. But little by little they were pushed back. The leader of the attackers came forward, a woman with silver markings across her armor and eyes like sharp glass. She moved with the precision of someone who had trained her whole life for this moment. This was Commander Lyra of the Arvari Dominion, though Gyujin did not yet know her name. She gave a signal, and her soldiers surged forward. Gyujin tried to fall back to regroup, but 2 soldiers cut him off. In moments, his weapon was knocked from his hand. He landed hard on the floor, breath knocked from his lungs. Lyra stepped closer, her tall shadow falling over him. She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Terran Captain," she said in a voice like cold metal. "You will come with us." He met her gaze without fear. "My crew. They live for now. Cooperate, and they might continue to." 2 soldiers pulled him to his feet and bound his hands. Gyujin's eyes swept the corridor, noting the wounded crew members, the silent civilians peeking from doorways. He forced his voice to remain calm. "Stand down," he told them. "No more fighting." Lyra tilted her head slightly, as if surprised he would surrender so easily. She turned and walked back toward the boarding tube. Her soldiers dragged Gyujin behind her. The alien flagship was enormous. As they stepped aboard the Spear of the Horizon, Gyujin felt the shift in atmosphere, the cold bite of recycled air mixed with something unfamiliar. The corridors were tall and curved, lit by soft violet light. The walls seemed almost alive, with faint pulses of energy moving through them. They brought him to a chamber that overlooked the stars. Lyra stood before a wide, arched window, her hands clasped behind her back. She did not turn when she spoke. "You are my prisoner now, Captain Han Gyujin. Your ship and crew will be held until the Dominion decides your fate." Eugene said nothing. He stood straight, his bound hands steady. She glanced at him, her eyes sharp. "You don't seem afraid." "I've been in dangerous places before," he replied simply. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she gestured to her soldiers. "Take him to the holding cells." They led him down a spiral corridor to a small cell with transparent walls. The bed was little more than a metal frame, the air cold and dry. As the door sealed shut, Eugene sat and looked out at the distant stars. Somewhere out there his crew was waiting. He would have to be patient. From the observation deck above, Lyra watched him for a while. She had captured enemy officers before, but none of them had looked at her the way he did. Calm, almost curious. She told herself it was just another prisoner. Yet something in her mind kept turning back to him. And far beyond the walls of the Arvari flagship, the quiet ocean of stars waited, holding secrets neither of them yet understood. The cell was silent except for the faint hum of the ship's engines. Han Gyujin sat on the edge of the cold metal bed. His back straight, eyes half closed as if he were resting. But his mind was far from rest. He replayed every moment since the ambush, searching for any opening, any weakness in his captor's actions. The sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor. The door slid open, and Commander Lyra stepped in. She no longer wore her helmet, revealing sharp, angled features and hair the color of deep bronze. Her eyes were fixed on him with a calculating calm. "Captain," she said evenly, "you will answer my questions." He met her gaze without moving. "I can listen." Lyra studied him for a moment before sitting on a chair across from him. "Your mission. The reason you were in the Proxima Expanse." Eugene's expression did not change. "Escort duty for civilians. You saw them. You expect me to believe Terrans risk a military vessel for 2 unarmed ships?" she asked, her tone carrying both suspicion and curiosity. "That's exactly what we do," he replied. "Protect those who can't fight." Lyra leaned forward slightly, as if trying to read him more closely. "You speak as though you believe it. Many of my own people would not risk their lives for strangers. Maybe that's why you keep fighting endless wars," he said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "Careful, Captain." The silence that followed felt heavy. She broke it by gesturing to the guards outside. They stepped forward, placing a tray of food on the bed beside him. The meal was strange. Small portions of something that looked like silver-blue bread and a pale soup that smelled faintly of spice. Lyra stood. "Eat. You will need strength for further questioning." She turned to leave, but Gyujin spoke before she reached the door. "Why did you capture me alive? You had enough firepower to destroy my ship." She paused but didn't turn back. "A live captain is worth more than a dead one." Then she left. Hours passed. The artificial day and night cycle of the ship dimmed the lights in the corridor, signaling night. Gyujin lay back, staring at the faint lines of light that ran across the ceiling. He heard movement outside his cell, a quieter set of footsteps, hesitant. The door opened slightly, and a young Arvari guard stepped in. His armor was smaller, his posture less certain. He carried no weapon in hand. "I brought water," the guard said awkwardly. Gyujin accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." The guard lingered, as if wanting to say more. "You are different from what they told us about humans." Gyujin gave a faint smile. "And what did they tell you?" "That humans are selfish, chaotic, dangerous." He took a slow sip of water. "We can be all those things. But we can also be the opposite. Do you know a story from my world about a small village and a river?" The guard shook his head. So Gyujin told him. A simple tale of a river that would flood every year, and how the people learned to work together to build walls and share food until the flood passed. "Alone they would have drowned," he said. "Together they survived." The guard listened closely, his eyes thoughtful. When Gyujin finished, the young Arvari stood quietly for a moment before saying, "That is not like the stories we hear in the Dominion." "Maybe your leaders don't want you to hear those kinds of stories," Gyujin said. The guard seemed troubled but said nothing more. He left quickly, glancing around as though afraid to be seen. The next day Lyra returned, her tone sharper. "I hear you've been speaking to my guards." "I spoke to someone who offered me water," he said simply. "And told him stories," she said, her voice low. "Why?" Eugene shrugged lightly. "Stories are harmless." She stepped closer to the transparent wall of the cell. "Nothing is harmless in war, Captain." They studied each other in silence, an unspoken test of wills. Lyra finally turned and gestured for him to follow. "You will come with me." 2 guards escorted him down long corridors filled with the hum of machinery and the faint vibration of the engines. They arrived at a large room lined with screens, each showing Arvari propaganda, images of their fleets, their soldiers, their victories. Lyra stopped in the center and turned to him. "This is the truth of the Dominion," she said. "Strength, order, and unity under our rule. Humanity should learn from it." Eugene looked at the screens for a long moment, then shook his head. "That's not unity. That's control. Real unity is when people choose to stand together." Her jaw tightened. "And your people, are they so free? Or does your Terran alliance have its own chains?" "Every society has problems," he admitted. "But we don't force our neighbors to kneel. We ask them to walk beside us." For a moment, she seemed almost unsure how to answer. Then she gestured for the guards to take him back. But as they walked, he noticed the smallest shift in her expression, something like doubt. That night, he heard quiet voices outside his cell. 2 guards were speaking in their own language, but he caught enough to understand. They were discussing the Terran captain, not as an enemy, but as someone who might be telling the truth. Eugene lay back on the bed, his eyes on the ceiling once again. He had not escaped, not even come close. But something was changing here. And he knew that in war, sometimes the smallest change was the first step toward a greater shift. Life aboard the Spear of the Horizon moved with the same mechanical rhythm each day. The crew worked, the engines hummed, and orders from the Dominion flowed through the ship like an unbroken chain. Yet, in small ways, Han Eugene began to notice that the chain was no longer as tight as it had been. The guards at his cell no longer stood with the same stiff posture. They spoke less harshly, sometimes even meeting his eyes. One of them left extra food on his tray without a word. Another, when passing, gave him a faint nod, as if acknowledging him not just as a prisoner, but as a person. Lyra noticed it too. She had been a commander for many years and could read her crew as easily as she read a star chart. The change unsettled her. She told herself it was a threat, that the human was slowly poisoning discipline. But another part of her, quiet, dangerous, was curious about why it was happening. One day, she summoned him from his cell without explanation. 2 guards escorted him to a long observation deck with wide glass panels. Outside, the stars glittered in the black. Below, a planet turned slowly, its surface covered with jagged mountains and silver seas. Lyra stood beside one of the panels, her hands behind her back. "This is Vereen," she said. "One of our core worlds. The heart of the Dominion's industry." Eugene studied the planet. "Beautiful," he said simply. She glanced at him. "You do not hide your thoughts." "Why should I? Beauty is beauty, no matter who it belongs to." Her gaze lingered on him before she looked back at the planet. "Do you know why our people fight? Why we expand?" He shook his head. "I could guess. Resources, power, security. The same reasons empires have always given." "We bring order to chaos," she said firmly. "Before the Dominion, these worlds fought each other endlessly. Now they work together. Because they have to," he replied. "Not because they want to." The words made her shoulders stiffen. She turned to face him fully. "And your Terran alliance? Do all your worlds join willingly?" "Not all. Some take convincing. Some resist. But in the end, they stay because they choose to, not because our ships hover over them." Lyra did not respond right away. She dismissed the guards and kept him there longer than necessary, questioning him about his people, his history, even his childhood. His answers were simple, almost too simple, but they carried a kind of honesty she was not used to. Later, a sudden call over the ship's comms broke the quiet. Pirate vessels had been detected in a nearby asteroid belt. The Spear of the Horizon altered course immediately. Lyra gave orders with her usual precision, but when they entered the belt, the pirates attacked faster than expected. The bridge shuddered under the impact of their weapons. Shields held, but the pirate ships moved like predators in the dark, using the asteroids for cover. Lyra stood at the command station, her jaw tight as she gave instructions. "Target their engines. Drive them off," she ordered. The fight dragged on. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw Eugene standing beside the guard who had brought him to the bridge. His hands were still bound, but his eyes followed the battle displays with sharp focus. "You're fighting them wrong," he said suddenly. Every head on the bridge turned toward him. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "They're baiting you," he said, nodding at the display. "They want you to chase them into the thicker parts of the field, where their ships can hide and strike from behind. You need to push them toward open space, where your heavier weapons can work." Lyra hesitated only a moment before giving new orders based on his suggestion. The ship's formation shifted, cutting off the pirates' escape route through the asteroids. Within minutes, the pirates broke and fled. When the danger was over, she turned to him. "How did you see that?" "I've dealt with pirates before," he said simply. "They're the same everywhere. Bold when they think they have the upper hand, cowards when they don't." She studied him for a moment longer, then signaled for him to be returned to his cell. But later that night, she found herself replaying the battle in her mind. His plan had worked perfectly. Over the next days, Lyra began to test him in small ways. She asked for his opinion on supply routes, on patrol patterns, even on crew morale. Each time his answers were practical, not arrogant. He never acted as though he knew better than her, yet his suggestions often solved problems she had not considered. The crew noticed. Some began to talk quietly in the mess halls, wondering why the human captain was being consulted at all. Others, especially those who had spoken to him before, seemed to respect him more with each passing day. One evening, Lyra passed by the lower decks and saw him through the cell wall, speaking again to the young guard. He was telling another story, this one about a small crew trapped in deep space with no fuel, surviving by sharing what little they had until rescue came. Lyra stood there for a long moment, listening without meaning to. The story was simple, even childish by Arvari standards. But there was something in the way he told it, in the way his voice softened when speaking of trust and sacrifice, that stayed with her. When she walked away, she did not notice the small smile on the young guard's face, or the fact that 2 more crew members had stopped to listen. The next day, Lyra caught herself hesitating before delivering an order from the Dominion High Command, an order to increase patrol pressure on a newly conquered world. She carried it out in the end, but the hesitation lingered, a seed she could not quite remove. Han Eugene, meanwhile, waited patiently. He knew he had no weapon, no ship, no freedom. But he could see the cracks forming. And he knew that sometimes, the smallest cracks could break even the strongest walls. The Spear of the Horizon glided through the dark, its engines steady and sure. Days had passed without incident, the kind of calm that made crews restless. Han Eugene spent most of his time in his cell, but he could feel something in the air, an unspoken tension that even the steady hum of the ship could not hide. Then the calm broke. The alarm sounded without warning, a deep tone that echoed through every deck. The lights flickered to a warning red. Eugene looked up as the young guard rushed past his cell. Speaking quickly into his comm, he caught only part of the words. "Stellar flare. Incoming. All ships in danger." Moments later, Lyra herself appeared, flanked by 2 guards. "Captain Han, you will come with me," she said quickly. The guards released his bindings, and he followed her at a brisk pace. The corridors were busier than he had ever seen them, crew members hurrying to stations, the air filled with short, urgent voices. On the bridge, The main display showed a massive star, its surface churning and boiling. Bright arcs of plasma flared outward, reaching far into space. The readings scrolled fast across the side screens. "Radiation surge in 8 minutes," the sensor officer said. "The flare will hit everything in this sector." Lyra's jaw tightened. "Helm, prepare to jump out of range." The helm officer hesitated. "Ma'am, several ships are too deep in the gravity well to escape in time. 2 Arvari transports and..." He glanced at Eugene. "And 1 Terran civilian vessel." Eugene stepped forward. "You can't leave them. The transports and the Terran ship will need to shelter behind the largest body in the area." Lyra shot him a sharp look. "The only large body nearby is that asteroid cluster. The flare will strip half its surface. It won't protect them completely." "Not if they stay still," Eugene said. "But if they move through it, keeping the largest asteroids between them and the star at all times, they might survive. They'll need a guide to plot the course in real time." Lyra hesitated. "Even if that works, the spear would have to stay close to protect them. We would take heavy damage." Eugene's voice was calm. "Then it's a question of how many lives you're willing to lose." The bridge went quiet. Every officer's eyes moved between the 2 commanders. Lyra's hands tightened behind her back, but then she gave the order. "Helm, adjust course to intercept the stranded ships. Tactical, prepare to deploy defensive screens around the convoy." The crew moved quickly. The spear accelerated, closing the distance to the smaller ships. Through the forward glass, the flare grew brighter, a boiling wave of light and heat racing outward. "Captain Hahn," Lyra said without looking at him, "you will assist navigation." They moved to a side console. Eugene scanned the asteroid field, marking a twisting path between the largest rocks. His voice was steady as he called out each turn, each adjustment. The convoy entered the field. Massive chunks of rock drifted in slow motion, some larger than entire buildings. The spear moved at the head, its shields shimmering faintly under the rising radiation. Behind, the transports and the Terran vessel followed in perfect formation. The flare hit the edges of the field first. Light brighter than anything they had ever seen washed across the asteroids, stripping dust and fragments from their surfaces. The shields flared and groaned. The temperature inside the ship climbed despite the cooling systems. "Hold course," Eugene said. "Keep asteroid 11 on our port side. It'll block the next wave." The ship turned smoothly, the massive rock sliding into position between them and the star. The first surge of the flare struck it head-on, breaking apart parts of its surface but sparing the convoy. Minutes felt like hours. The ships weaved through the drifting giants, always keeping the thickest shields of stone between them and the fury of the star. Smaller rocks broke apart, scattering debris that clanged against the spear's hull. At last, the sensors showed the flare's strength dropping. The boiling wave of energy passed, leaving the asteroid field glowing faintly from the heat. A cheer rose from the crew. The transports and the Terran vessel were intact, their signals strong. Lyra exhaled slowly and turned to Eugene. "Your plan worked." He simply nodded. "It was the only plan." Later, when the emergency had passed and the ships had cleared the asteroid field, Lyra found Eugene standing near the observation deck. The light from the nearby star reflected off the glass, painting his face in gold. "You could have stayed silent," she said. "You could have let my ships burn, knowing I am your enemy." "I'm not your enemy," he replied. "Not here. Not now. Out there, those were just people trying to live another day." She studied him, her voice quieter. "Leadership is not just tactics and orders. It's knowing which lives are worth the risk." "All of them," he said simply. For the first time since she had met him, she felt something shift inside her. A small, dangerous thought. Maybe not everything she had been taught about humans or about leadership was true. When they returned to normal patrol, Lyra found herself speaking less like a commander of the Dominion and more like a leader of people. She caught herself asking her crew for opinions more often, listening more than she ordered. The changes were small, almost invisible, but Han Gyujin noticed. And he knew the flare had done more than threaten the ships in the sector. It had burned something away inside Lyra, leaving room for something new to grow. The days after the flare felt different aboard the Spear of the Horizon. The crew went about their duties, but there was a quiet change in how they moved, in how they looked at the Terran captain in the cell. Han Gyujin was still a prisoner, but he no longer felt like one in their eyes. Lyra noticed the change, though she said nothing. She told herself it was dangerous, that her crew was letting sentiment interfere with discipline. Yet she could not deny that she herself had begun to see him differently. Then the order came. It arrived as a secure transmission from Dominion High Command, carrying the seal of the ruling council. Lyra read it in silence, her face unreadable. When she finished, she closed the file and stood still for a long moment. The order was simple: execute the human captain. His survival was no longer useful to the Dominion, and his influence on the crew was considered a threat. She went to his cell personally. The door opened and she stepped inside. Gyujin looked up from where he sat on the narrow bed. "Is this the part where you try to break me again?" he asked. Her voice was steady. "The Dominion has ordered your execution." He held her gaze, no fear in his eyes. "I see. You don't seem surprised," she said. "I'm not. You've kept me alive longer than most empires would." She looked at him for a long time before speaking again. "I can follow the order. Or I can break it." He raised an eyebrow. "And what would breaking it cost you?" "Everything," she said simply. The silence between them stretched. Then she turned toward the door. "Follow me." They moved through the corridors quietly, avoiding the main decks. The ship's night cycle dimmed the lights, and most of the crew was either at rest or at distant posts. They passed only a few officers, and each one looked away quickly, as if sensing something they should not question. At last, they reached one of the auxiliary hangar bays. Inside was a small shuttle, its engines powered down but ready to start. Lyra stopped beside the ramp and turned to face him. "This will take you to the edge of the sector," she said. "From there you can send a signal to your alliance." Gyujin studied her face. "Why are you doing this?" She hesitated before answering. "Because I have seen you risk yourself for people you should have no reason to protect. Because you made me see my own people in a way I never wanted to. And because," she stopped then said quietly, "because if I kill you, I will never stop wondering what you could have changed." He nodded slowly. "And what about you? What will you do after this?" Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "I will continue to serve, until I can no longer accept the orders I am given. And then I will decide what must come next." Gyujin stepped onto the shuttle's ramp, then paused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data chip. "A star map," he said. "Terran space. Not just the borders, the places worth seeing. If you ever want to see the galaxy without chains, start there." She took it, closing her hand around it. "Perhaps I will." For a moment, they simply stood there, looking at each other as if trying to memorize the moment. Then he gave her a faint smile. "The galaxy is bigger than the chains you wear," he said. Without another word, he stepped inside the shuttle. Lyra activated the hangar controls, and the great outer doors opened. The shuttle lifted, its engines flaring softly, and then it slipped into the dark. She stood at the edge of the hangar, watching until the small light of the shuttle vanished among the stars. Only then did she look down at the star map in her hand. When she returned to her quarters, she found herself staring at the map again and again. She thought of the flare, of the convoy they had saved, of the stories he had told her crew. She thought of the way some of them had begun to question, quietly, what the Dominion told them. The next morning, she gave her orders as usual, but her voice carried a different weight. Her eyes lingered on her crew a little longer. And deep inside, she knew she would never serve the Dominion in the same way again. Somewhere far from the Spear of the Horizon, Han Gyujin's shuttle moved through the endless black, carrying him back to his people. But behind him, on a ship still loyal to the Dominion, at least for now, the first seeds of rebellion had already begun to grow.